Near the end of the Dance of the Dragons in Fire and Blood, Archmaester Gildane takes a moment to ask a question he doesn't have an answer to. What was Larys Strong up to? What did he want? To whom was he truly loyal? Did he have a grand plan from the start, or was he just making it up as he went along? Gildane tells us that students of history have puzzled over this for generations, so it's probably supposed to be an unsolvable mystery. But today, we will be trying to come up with some possible answers to the question of what Larys was up to, and maybe some explanation for why. First, it's probably best to give a quick rundown of Larys' story during the dance, so this is your union-mandated warning that this episode will contain total spoilers for the book, and therefore presumably future seasons of House of the Dragon. Larys arrives in King's Landing in 105 AC, when his dad Lionel is appointed as the King's Hand. Larys joins the King's Confessors, which is a euphemism for torturers. In 120, a mysterious fire at Harrenhal conveniently kills Lionel and Larys' older brother Harwin, leaving Larys to inherit the castle, title, and wealth of House Strong. At some point in the next decade, he becomes Lord Confessor and Master of Whisperers, and so is present at the Green Council that convenes after the death of King Viserys in 129. Larys sides with the Greens, and remains at least nominally on their side for pretty much the whole war. When Rhaenyra invades King's Landing, she captures most of the Green Small Council, but Larys mysteriously vanishes, in the process helping King Aegon and his 2 surviving children to escape also. After Rhaenyra is kicked out of the city, Larys re-emerges from the shadows to support Trystane Truefire, a teenager claiming to be Viserys' bastard son who briefly sits the Iron Throne during the chaos of Rhaenyra's fall. However, when a Green army arrives at the capital following Rhaenyra's death, Larys is part of the delegation that goes to meet them and agrees to hand over the city, with Trystane Truefire being deposed and later executed. Larys is then involved in a convoluted plot to kill Aegon II, which works, and finally welcomes into King's Landing the Riverlands army loyal to Rhaenyra's only surviving son, Aegon III. Everything seems to be going fine until Cragan Stark, also a Rhaenyra supporter, shows up, arrests everyone involved in the murder of Aegon II, and sentences all except Corlys Velaryon to death. On the day of the execution, most get off the hook by asking to take the black, but Larys does not, choosing instead to die. The first thing you might notice from this is that despite his reputation, Larys seems pretty loyal to the Greens for almost the entire war. Sure, there's that moment where he puts Trystane Truefire on the throne, and it is entirely his doing, as the knight who raised Trystane up in the first place, Sir Perkin the Flea, admitted to being Larys' agent. But on the face of it, that looks like an expedient to gain control of the capital until the Greens could get an army together, as demonstrated by the speed with which Larys abandoned Trystane in favour of the Greens. Really, the only time Larys truly changes sides is when he orchestrates the plot to kill Aegon II right at the end, and at that moment the Greens have pretty much lost the war. Until then, there's no obvious reason in the official record to doubt Larys' loyalty. This surface-level overview of Larys' time in the dance gives us some idea of what he was up to, but the trouble is that there's a lot that happens in Fire and Blood that might be Larys' doing or might not be. As he's the Master of Whisperers and at one point proves his ability to just vanish at will, there's a lot he could be doing behind the scenes. So we'll have to build up our picture of Larys layer by layer, starting with what we know, trying to figure out his motives from that, and then trying to piece together a narrative of what he was doing when we weren't looking. Fire and Blood is not a very good book for complex character motivations, especially when they're secondary characters who don't get much page time. Nonetheless, there's 2 key events that I think are crucial for how we view Larys. The first is the mysterious fire that kills Lionel and Harwin Strong. Gildane gives us a bunch of suspects for this, including the possibility that it's an accident or a result of the curse of Harrenhal, but Larys is by far the most likely. For one thing, the other 3 suspects, Corlys, Daemon and Viserys, who by the way is accused by Archmaester Mellos, which is pretty wild, don't have any reason stated to want to kill Lionel, and in fact his death is bad for all 3, as it leads to Otto Hightower being reinstated as Hand. Gildane thinks that might have been an accident, because Lionel was initially not supposed to be going back to Harrenhal, but the logistics of this don't really add up. How would the killer or the killer's agent not notice that Lionel was at Harrenhal, when he would have arrived at the same time as Harwin and is, a great lord, they don't exactly blend in. Larys, on the other hand, has a motive for killing both, namely that he inherits Harrenhal and all the money, power and status that come with it. Oh, and in the show he admits to doing it, so take that for what it's worth. With this information we can make the scolding hot take that Larys is not a very nice man, but more than that he wants power, money, status or influence, and is willing to go to extreme lengths to get it, and also that he probably didn't like his family very much. This still doesn't really answer the question of why he wants power or whatever it is. Is it just for its own sake, or is it for what that power can get him? The second crucial event that tells us about the way Larys' mind works is his death. Larys might have thought that he was in the clear. When the surviving Greens yield King's Landing to the lads at the end of the war, Mushroom suspects that Larys arranged a friendly welcome for them to make them more amenable, and indeed Larys manages to keep his freedom until Craig and Stark shows up. Craig identifies Larys along with Corlys as one of those who manipulated the lads into believing the war is over, and locks them both up. The strange thing about Larys' death is that it was completely avoidable. First, Larys offers no defence when accused by Craig, saying only that when was a wolf ever moved by words, and is thus condemned to death along with Grand Maester Orwyle, Perkin the Flea, 4 members of the Kingsguard, dozens more randomers, and Corlys Velaryon, who gets let off in the end. But when the day of the execution comes, the first up to the chopping block, Perkin the Flea, asks to take the black, and when it works, everyone copies him. Everyone, that is, except for Sir Giles Belgrave, who has a principled reason for accepting his death, and Larys Strong. Larys doesn't talk much in the book, so his longest speech is probably the one he gives here, where he turns down Craig's offer to go to the wall. There's 2 things here which interest us. 1, that he doesn't take the offer, and 2, that he asks Craig to hack off my clubfoot with that great sword of yours, because I have dragged it with me all through life. Let me be free of it in death at least. We're told that Larys' body was given to the Silent Sisters, and only years later was returned to Harrenhal. But in this time, his clubfoot went missing, according to Mushroom, because it was sold to a sorcerer. Larys' 2 choices give us more insight into his character than probably any other thing which he is confirmed to have done, or at least as confirmed as anything in Fire and Blood can be. That he would rather die than go to the wall suggests that his life is not really that important to him in and of itself. Being at the wall would make his life not worth living, perhaps because he wouldn't have any chance of power, money, influence or status, or maybe that the thing he wanted those things for would be unattainable. This is especially likely when we consider that Larys probably could have easily avoided actually going to the wall if it was just a cold he really didn't like. Grand Maester Orwyle is able to slip away and hide in secret in King's Landing for a bit, and if he's able to do that, surely Larys, the man who can seemingly disappear and reappear at will, would have been able to. And if he doesn't care about dying anyway, why not at least give dodging the draft a shot, seeing as the worst that can happen is that you get caught and then executed, which is what's going to happen anyway. It's not just the wall that is a fate worse than death for Larys then, it's something else. Perhaps the prospect of not having the status, power, money, influence, etc. that he held right up until the point Craig and Stark showed up. Whatever it is Larys wants, he can't get it as a Night's Watchman, or as a fugitive. The second big choice is a request to cut off his foot. If we take this at face value, then it suggests that Larys' disability is a big part not just of his physical existence, but also his personality. We've seen a lot of characters in A Song of Ice and Fire struggle to come to terms with life-changing injuries, most notably Jaime and Bran, while others such as Tyrion have been defined from birth by their physical abnormalities, in the eyes of their close relations, the world at large, and even themselves. It's a bit late in Larys' narrative journey to be introducing this point, you might think, but then again Fire and Blood is written as a history book, and not a history of Larys, but a history of the dance. If we extrapolate backwards from Larys' last request, we can see how Larys' disability would be both a physical burden he drags around with him and a social and mental burden that he has to carry wherever he goes, so much so that it becomes part of his name. When he is first introduced, he is Larys the Clubfoot, and it is rare that he will be mentioned in Fire and Blood without his disability as an epithet or just a plain old nickname. And it is clear that this has an impact on his path in life. When he comes to court in 105 AC, when he is probably quite young, maybe an older teenager, he's made one of the king's torturers, because what else do you do with a man with a clubfoot? By contrast, Larys' brother Harwin becomes a captain in the City Watch. In the show, Larys says that his dad thought his twisted foot was a mark of sorcery, and gives Aegon a speech about how society will view him differently after the wounds he suffers at the Battle of Rook's Rest. Larys' story could be seen as similar to Tyrion's, where the societal assumption that Tyrion is a twisted, evil imp leads to him assuming that role, with the tipping point being during his trial for the murder of Joffrey, a crime he did not commit, but the certainty of the court that he did and their mockery of him makes him declare, "You make me sorry that I am not the monster you would have me be." The frustrating thing about applying this motivation to Larys is that there's not really a lot of evidence to go on, except for his last request to chop off his foot. And while we can be fairly confident that Larys would have faced mockery and ostracization for his disability, it is something of a leap to say that the resentment this would likely have brewed would be enough to make him want to murder 2 family members, or what broader motivation it would give him for his actions in the dance. Perhaps it would make him want to get back at society in some way, or simply to defy its denigration of him by rising to power and staying there. And I've put it off for as long as possible, but it's time to talk about the other motivation for Larys that might be related to feet. One that is only present in the show. Even if, like me, you still haven't watched House of the Dragon, if you're in the A Song of Ice and Fire fandom, community, asylum, you probably know what I'm talking about. If not, just enjoy this image, which this video is mostly just an excuse to make. The idea of Larys being a high-minded, cerebral master manipulator, player of the 5-dimensional Game of Thrones with multiverse time travel, being ultimately motivated by something as base and animal as a foot fetish, is oddly satisfying. It's a reminder that even those who affect an air of superiority are still human, still governed by the necessities of bodily functions and the primal drives of being a biological mechanism. Tywin is a good example of this from the main series. He always comes across as superior, aloof, above the petty distractions of the rest of humankind. But this is doubly undermined when Tyrion first finds he slept with Shae and then shoots him in the guts while he's on the loo, the last line of the chapter being, Lord Tywin Lannister did not, in the end, shit gold. And after his death, his body rots and stinks just like the rest of us. In this reading, then, Larys is driven to gain power and influence, at least in part, because they will facilitate his desire to get feet pics from Alicent Hightower. That he's willing to go to such lengths makes him a pathetic figure, while at the same time he remains just as powerful and dangerous as he was before we pinpointed a motivation for him. I'm talking about Larys as a somewhat desperate figure motivated by an unhealthy, predatory and unrequited lust, while on the surface maintaining an image of cerebral genius, means I can no longer avoid discussing the comparisons between Larys and Littlefinger. Though in truth Larys is more of a combination of Littlefinger and Varys, I guess Littlefinger sounded too stupid, rather than a one-to-one copy of either, we'll start with Littlefinger, who I also like to interpret as a man driven by base infatuation with first Cat and then Sansa, but who is also a master manipulator and is able to keep these simplistic motivations hidden from the rest of the world. Better readers than me have made multi-hour analyses of Littlefinger's motivations, which you should go watch if you haven't already, and I won't be trying to get into all that here. So let's just say that his obsession with Cat and Sansa is at least part of his personality and motivation, and leave it there. If Larys is something of a Littlefinger analogue, then that motivation may copy across, along with everything else. And there are a lot of similarities between Larys and Littlefinger. They both become Lords of Harrenhal, but prefer to stay at court, using the title for the influence it provides rather than the lands or wealth. They both have to make their own way in the world to an extent, Larys as a second son, Littlefinger as a petty lordling. They both get involved in a plot to poison a petty, vindictive young monarch, neither for very noble reasons. Both spread rumours as part of their schemes. Both are nicknamed after a body part. Both are unmarried and seemingly uninterested in anyone, except, perhaps, as we said, the objects of their respective obsessions. If these similarities of situation add more credence to the idea that their motivations might be similar, and for the record, Gurm says he doesn't deliberately make characters that are simple parallels of one another, but with the amount of characters in these stories it probably happens by accident eventually, then the similarities with Varys might also be telling about Larys' motivations. Both are masters of whisperers with the title of Lord, but for most of the story don't have de facto control over lands. Both can disappear and reappear seemingly at will, partly because they know all the secret passages in the Red Keep. Both are witty, as is Littlefinger. Both have a body part cut off that is then used for magical purposes. Both work to put a teenager with a dubious claim to Targaryen lineage on the throne, and both have a flair for the dramatic, as seen with Larys, for example, swearing a blood oath at the Green Council. The last one is where a possible motivation comes into view. Both Larys and Varys enjoy the Game of Thrones and the activity of scheming. Again, people have done whole series on what makes Varys tick, but the 30-second version I'll give you is based on his conversation with Kevan at the end of Dance. Specifically, that there is a conversation at all. Varys monologues about his schemes to a dying man for no real reason other than that he presumably enjoys it. This motivation could well be applied to Larys in the same way that Littlefinger's infatuation with Sansa could be. Larys also has a penchant for elaborate schemes, constantly switching sides, playing people off each other, moving his pieces around on the chessboard, and all the time with a smile on his face. Perhaps Larys accepted death at the end because without his Game of Thrones, or his feet pics, his life would simply not be worth living. Hello, it's me from the future here. I was going to do this as one video, but it got too long, so I split it into 2 parts. So yeah, thanks for watching this one. And I'll see you in the next one. Don't know when it'll come out. Probably about the same length as this one. God, these take forever to edit. But yeah, thanks for watching, and thanks for 1,000 subscribers as well. Pretty mental, isn't it? But, yeah, there you go. Bye.